Welcome everybody to another edition of Bible for Friends with Spencer and Jared this Sunday, and we're in the book of Ecclesiastes. Today we're going to finish out chapter 10. We only have a few verses to go through, so today might be a little bit of a shorter Bible study. But let's get started. On the PowerPoint, you can see right now the conclusions from the main points that we went over last week when we were going through half of chapter 9 and then the first half of chapter 10. And you can read them there. There was a lot of interesting things. What we're noticing now is that the style of the writing in Ecclesiastes has become more like the literature of Proverbs, where he's giving you wise sayings, and oftentimes he contrasts wisdom with foolishness, and we're going to continue to see that today, and a lot of things that we can take with us this week. I think that I for one want to apply to my life because there's still a lot of work to be done. My character. All right, so. We're in verse 12. Spencer, could you read these 4 verses for us, please?
Words from the mouth of a wise person are gracious, while the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of his talking is foolishness, and the end of it is evil insanity. Yet the fool multiplies words. No person knows what will happen, and who can tell him what will come after him? The labor of a fool makes him so weary that he does not even know how to go to a city.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Spencer. What do you guys say it means to be gracious in your own words?
Gracious, like thankful?
Gracious, like in the context of verse 12. It says, words from the mouth of a wise person are gracious.
So I don't have an exact answer yet, but in reading the contrast for a fool, so that's saying that it consumes him. So it's, I guess, maybe revealing something about like their character, or this is just me kind of openly thinking about it.
Yes.
So graciousness.
It's like showing grace, like being kind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, grace, which is a synonym for mercy, which is the act of forgiving somebody or giving something that one does not deserve. And it's something that we're familiar with because as Christians, we believe that our sins are forgiven. In other words, God is merciful on us, and He calls us to be to reflect His character, His image, and so it makes sense here that a wise person has words that are gracious, are merciful, forgiving towards others, and ourselves sometimes, because sometimes we can be a little bit harsh on ourselves, and that can dig us into a hole of anxiety, stress, depression. But wisdom teaches us to be gracious. And what would you say is the opposite of grace?
I don't know, smite.
Smite? Yeah, that's a good one. Jared, you have an idea?
Disgrace? No.
I guess that's technically
Yeah, you got it. I like that. Disgrace. Yeah, when you're a fool, you can cause a lot of disgrace.
Like shame.
Yeah, shame. Yeah, exactly. You instead of making people feel forgiven, you make people feel shame. And the way you cause somebody to feel shame is by criticizing, judging, condemning. And it's interesting, like the contrast is between a wise person, the speech of a wise person, and the speech of a foolish person. And so if a wise person is gracious, then a foolish person is judgmental, critical, you name it. And I find this to be, perhaps, this is my own interpretation, but I think this could be connected with verse 2 of this chapter that we read last week, or the last time we met. And the last time we met, I didn't quite understand what this meant. It could be related to this. So it had another contrast between a wise person and a foolish person, and what their hearts lean towards, and what direction their hearts go. And so it says a wise person's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish person's heart directs him toward the left. And this made me think of a commentary that I've heard where the right hand side and the left hand side have a symbol or a meaning in the Bible and in Jewish thought, where the right hand represents mercy and honor. For example, Jesus is placed at the right side of God, a place of honor. And when you have mercy on somebody, you're kind of elevating them. So that's what the right hand represents. And the left side is a side that also is a character of God, which is the side of truth and judgment. Because God has those two sides to him. He is merciful, but he also doesn't pardon the guilty that doesn't repent. He also has to judge according to his laws, and he has to be just, fair, and so that's what the left side represents. And it's interesting, here that we see a wise person goes towards the right, but a foolish person goes towards the left. And if we connect that to verse 12, perhaps this could be saying that, we're not called to be critical of other people. If we do, we're going to be foolish, and that would lead us to reap what we sow, and other people will be critical of us, and eventually we'll be destroyed, because Jesus said that don't judge somebody, or don't. Oh man, I can't remember. Something along the lines that if you judge somebody and you don't do that thing that you're judging well, you don't have that trait, then you're going to be judged for that same reason, and you're going to be condemned. And it's going to be even worse, because you weren't merciful on somebody, you're not going to receive mercy. And so the thing to take away is that we're not called to be critical or judgmental, but we're called to be gracious towards others and merciful. But there is one who is called to be both gracious, merciful, and somebody who upholds truth and judgment and righteous judgment. And we can find that in James 4, verses 11 through 12. Jared, could you read these verses for us?
Please. Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges, I read that wrong. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor?
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah. So this is interesting. The law, or as it is also known, the Torah, it has a lot of instructions that distinguish between what's right and what's wrong. And so there's an objective truth to it. If you go, this way, if you go outside the instruction, you're wrong. You're sin. If you remain inside of the instruction, you're remaining in purity and consecration. It makes us think that we might have a role in what's the word? In delivering the law, or in other words, being like a policeman who's in charge of making sure people are following the law. And to be a policeman, you have to go through a lot of training. You have to receive that title. You can't just, if you see somebody speeding on the road, you can't pull them over unless that's your role. You're called to do that. And so it's the same way when we study the law. We know the law. We study the Torah, and we make a mistake when we think that we're in a role of being a judge. That's not what it's for, because it says in verse 11, anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. We're not supposed to be judges of the law, because it says when we judge the law, you're not keeping it, but sitting in judgment. And so who can judge? It says that there's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? So what the law actually does call us to do is to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's one of the 2 commandments that Jesus said were the top 2 most important commandments in the whole Torah. In other words, the whole Torah is summarized in loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, and loving God with all our heart, with all our strength, with all our mind, in some places with all our soul. So yeah, we could take that. The only time where I was thinking more about it, the only time where I think it is permissible to be somebody that executes or gives judgment is when we are in a disciple and like teacher relationship with somebody, with a specific person that we want to help. For example, the relationship between a father and his son or daughter. That's an example where the father is called to guide, to instruct his child, and to do that, he has to tell them if he's in the wrong or if he's in the right, to guide them. So it's only for guidance, but we're not called to use it to make ourselves superior or make others inferior to us, because we're all sinners. Nobody can boast on their actions. There's only one lawgiver and only one judge. Yeah. Does that make sense? Do you guys have any comments or questions?
That makes sense.
Okay, nice. Yep. Alrighty. So continuing on to verse 13, it continues to give you characteristics of a foolish person. And verse 13, you can see that the beginning of his talking, you can perceive that he's foolish, but at the end it becomes something like evil insanity. And that gives you an idea that the more he talks, the worse his words become. And it's like the effect of a snowball rolling down the hill. It becomes worse and worse, and eventually it could become a weapon that can damage, destroy other people. And that's why the Bible continually reminds its readers to be careful with what they say. And so one of those traits of foolishness is speaking excessively, not have any limits on what we say. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you guys have anything more to add or any questions on this topic?
Nope.
All right. Continue on the verse 16 and 17. Spencer, could you continue for us, please?
Woe to you, land whose king is a boy, and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, land whose king is of nobility, and whose princes eat at the appropriate time, for strength and not for drunkenness.
Mhm. Oh, yes. Recall in the last time we met earlier in chapter 10, the preacher mentions that one of the great evils that he sees in the world under the sun is that sometimes somebody who's a king acts immature and basically acts like a slave, and sometimes a slave has the traits of a leader, somebody that is like a king of nobility. And it's a shame when somebody who's in a leadership position, who you would expect to be wise and discerning and mature, is not. The consequences are terrible because he makes choices that affect a lot of other people, not just himself. And it's something that does happen. A lot of times there are leaders that are not fit for that role, and so that calls us to. Well, for me, I think that's an exhortation to be careful who we vote for, to judge them. Not judge, but to evaluate them by their character traits and the fruit of their life, because their decisions are going to impact us. What else was I going to say here? Yes, he was talking here specifically about the trait of immaturity, which is somebody who feasts or who enjoys before they work. So it mentions princes who feast in the morning, and equates that to basically a childish king. But the king who is of nobility, those rulers, they eat at the appropriate time, and so they work first, and after they've worked, they enjoy the fruit of their labor. So that's something that we want to also apply to our lives. We don't want to be men who want to enjoy play first, and then work, and then put in effort. First, we have to make sure that we're preparing, that we're investing our strength in things that are going to produce, because we're called to be givers. We're not called to be lazy. And then once we've put in the effort, then we can eat and rest and enjoy. And then the other thing that from verse 17 that I wanted to point out is, it says that the princes eat at the appropriate time, but that also they eat not for drunkenness, but for strength. So that reminds you of using things for their purpose. The purpose of food is not to be indulged in. It's supposed to give us energy and nutrition and satisfaction, so that we can continue to live a healthy life. And here it mentions drunkenness, right? So it's related to alcohol. But one thing to mention is that the Bible doesn't strictly outlaw the consumption of alcohol. It oftentimes talks about eating wine at celebrations, or drinking wine, eating. But it does tell you that drunkenness is not permitted, and losing control of your senses is a sin. And here's an example where drunkenness is presented with a negative connotation. And then in other places, it also speaks about gluttony as being parallel to drunkenness. There's an example of these priests in the book of First Samuel, who were, they were the sons of the high priest, and the priests, they would get to eat the food from the offerings that people would bring to the altar, and to atone for their sins and to bring peace offerings for God. And they would always take more than they should, and they would always take the best pieces for themselves. And it says that they were large men, and God saw that they were evil, They didn't want to take wives, for example, and he ended their lives. And you can see that all of that was connected. Their selfishness, their gluttony was making them not fit for being in the position of being priests, of atoning for people. So we need balance. In other words, we need balance. Consumption and excess of anything that's under the sun is harmful. Do you guys have any comments or questions?
It's funny that you mentioned the gluttony portion, because I was getting ready to ask, could you kind of compare drunkenness to gluttony in this sense? And I was trying to think about why drunkenness was chosen as opposed to gluttony.
That's yeah.
I would like Prince's drinking in the morning. Like some people, like they get up and they'll go straight to the bar and just start drinking, or getting drunk in the morning versus at night. To me, that's what it's talking about.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we can see these same, I guess, bad examples in our day, definitely. And we can also see, the result of that. People who don't, sadly, I think it becomes something that controls you. Eventually you become a slave to it, and so sadly, it's going to lead you to poverty in the end, and destruction. So it slowly destroys you, even though you think you're having a good time. All right. And I believe, these are the last few verses. Oh, did you guys have anything else to add? Sorry.
You mentioned tabernacle, right?
Yeah.
Just now. Yeah, we're doing a series in church on the tabernacle over the next couple months.
Nice.
It started today. They had like a whole model of the tabernacle like upstairs for everyone to go look at.
Really?
Yeah, like it was a really big model.
Can you walk in it? Could you walk into it?
No, it was kind of like set up like a museum, the lights over it, and then it's kind of like a model of it inside like a display glass, basically, and everyone walking around looking at it.
That's so cool. When we went to Israel in the desert, there's a small city where you can see a life-size reconstruction of the tabernacle in the desert, and we have videos of that. I want to show you guys all that. After this, perhaps we can look at it real quick. It's really cool. It helps you understand, there's all these items that it mentions in Exodus, and you don't know, what it's for, but it's amazing when you start making connections between the tabernacle and Jesus. There's a lot of connections, and you'll probably talk about it at church, and so that's why I think it's really beneficial to study those chapters of Exodus, which a lot of people think are a little bit dry, but
he kind of mentioned that today.
Oh, what's that?
He didn't mention that it was dry, but he was like, oh, like everyone's like, oh, it's the Old Testament, let's go to the new pastor, and he's like, we're gonna study this because it's an important connection to be made.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
there's a lot of important connections there. All right, verses 18 through 20. Jared, could you please close us out with these few verses?
Through extreme laziness, the rafters sag, and through idleness, the house leaks. People prepare a meal for enjoyment. Wine makes life joyful, and money is the answer to everything. Furthermore, in your bedroom, do not curse a king, and in your sleeping rooms, do not curse a rich person. For a bird of the sky will bring the sound, and the winged one will make your word known.
Yes. Thank you, Jared. So continuing on with this topic of immaturity, of laziness, now it's talking about, you can see that deterioration is the result of laziness. Letting things be how they are and not taking an initiative to do things now, putting things off. That's also a sign of an immature person, an immature king, and that's something that we want to avoid as much as we can. That doesn't just apply to physical things, but it applies especially to things that are not tangible, like relationships. And so that's why we have to, in the close circle that we have, the people that are most important to us, we have to invest in them. We have to do maintenance in our relationships all the time. And if we don't, then it's going to lead to destruction. It's going to lead to heartbreak and the damage. So, it's something to make a habit is to invest in other people and maintaining our relationships, as well as the things that are tangible and physical, the state of our belongings. And it's a nice thing, I think, to meditate on. And then in verse 19 is pretty interesting. It's like changing the topic very quickly. I think it talks about the purpose and using things for their designed purpose. And here we see three things that we've already mentioned two of them that have caused a lot of problems in society: food, alcohol, and money. We see a lot of obesity in society, especially in more developed countries. It seems like the quality of food becomes a lot worse. The ingredients are not really valued anymore, and they just put whatever they want into things, and sometimes they design food to be more addictive, and you can see the results. A lot of people don't have control of meals. They don't just use them for sustenance and enjoyment, but they use it as something that comforts them and that alleviates them from stresses of life, and that becomes a problem. And then wine, not to mention alcoholism, drunkenness, that's a big problem. And money, of course, that is mentioned. It is mentioned in the Bible that the love of money is the root of all evil. And I've seen it in my life that money has caused me a lot of problems, because when you have it, you don't feel stressed and worried, but all of a sudden something happens, an emergency comes up, and you're in a tight spot. It makes you become in my case, it's caused me to become a little bit of not as generous, as gracious, a more harsh person, and I'm trying to change that, because it's not the design that God has for us. And so that teaches us that things have a beneficial purpose, and if we use them correctly and with balance, then we're going to be able to access the benefits of these material things that are under the sun. But if these things become an object of adoration, then they can cause a lot of damage. So obviously this can apply to a lot more things, but this is a general, pretty good list of things that we want to make sure are in balance in our lives. And I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think it means in verse 19 when it says that money is the answer to everything?
To me, when I was reading that aloud, my initial thought was that it can solve kind of short-term, immediate problems. Initially reading through it, that was kind of what I was thinking, but then kind of going back on it, it was kind of tearing me a little bit, because as you've kind of alluded to, and from my own learning, we're not really supposed to, put as much faith in things like money and whatnot. We're supposed to have faith that, God will provide all for us. And it's kind of, having it can almost be like a false sense of security. It could be like an illusion. in that sense.
Yeah. Wow. I like those last words that you said. A false sense of security. Totally. Yeah.
But then to your point, there are times where if you don't have it, and something happens, having enough to get you through that situation, that would cure your short-term ailment, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know, it's kind of conflicting to me personally.
Yeah, I agree. For me too. I've struggled a lot with this topic of money now that I've come into this stage of life where I'm independent. I'm providing for a family right now. Maybe my wife will be able to support in that area in the future. Everything is in God's hands, but money is complicated, and I feel like it's become that way because of ideas that as Christians sometimes we fall into this trap of either thinking that money is really good or money is terrible. It's evil in itself intrinsically. But I think in the Bible you have two perspectives. One is like you said that we're not supposed to put our faith in money. If we do, then we're going to be disappointed. But the other side of it too is that we're not also called to be haters of money or people who want to become lazy. Like it says, God, you can see continuously in His promises, the blessings that He wanted to give to the Israelites, that He wanted them to prosper, and that happens in the form of growing in your wealth. And so the Bible talks a lot about principles, but the Bible does teach us that money is a tool, and God wants us to wants to bless us with wealth. But one of the things that it teaches us here, that where it says money is the answer to everything, is that one of the purposes of money is to solve problems, and whether that be our own problems or the problems of other people. We're called also to provide for our families. I think there's a verse in one of the letters of Paul where it says, if you don't provide for your own, then you should be considered an anathema. When we have more wealth, we have more opportunity to be generous with our wealth. And so that's one of the instructions in the Torah and in the law that God gave to the Israelites, is that they were to, when they were reaping from their fields after the harvest had come, they were not to reap every last bit of their crop. They had to leave a portion for the poor and for the stranger within their gates. And so that was a part of the system of that God wanted the Israelites to follow, is that there was always to be provision for people who were in difficult situations and people who were trying to become part of their community. And we should do the same as well in our try to be generous with what we have. And then for the last verse, I want to go to Matthew, where it talks about not cursing a king in your sleeping room or a rich person, because who knows if there's a bird that will come and make your word known. And I wanted to connect this with a teaching from our Messiah, from Jesus, where he teaches us how to resolve conflicts with others. And so now we don't have to insult people behind their backs, because the instruction that Jesus gives us is that if your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen to you, take one or two more with you, so that on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, every matter may be confirmed. And if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, he is to be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. So bringing it all together with what we were talking about in the beginning, with how we're not called to be judges and critical of other people, there are certain situations where we do things to gain a brother, to help somebody improve their life. And when we do have something to say about somebody that did something wrong, we don't tell them, exhort them in public. We do it in private. And if it's interesting in verse 16, it refers to one of the commandments in the Torah as well, where you should always judge things with 2 or 3 witnesses that are unbiased. And it gives you the advice of bringing somebody else so that they could together have a more weighty argument and give a more unbiased piece of advice. And then if he refuses that, and if he refuses the church, it gets more and more public after that. Then you might as well not associate with him because he doesn't want to correct his life. But this is a nice path to resolving conflicts with others that Jesus taught to his disciples. Do you guys have any questions or comments with this portion?
So at the end where it says he is to be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector, is that kind of more or less just saying to just have like a base level respect for whatever and kind of nothing more, like to not have like, I guess, a relationship with or like a significant one?
That's a good question. If we go back to the context of when Jesus was saying these words, in those days, Jews, they tended to have this doctrine that was erroneous. It wasn't based in the Torah that was given to Moses. They came up with this law on their own. It was a law given by man. And they said that Jews had to, in order to retain their identity, they had to avoid associating with Gentiles and people who were traitors to their people, like tax collectors who would charge taxes for the Roman Empire, who they wanted out. They didn't want to be ruled by the Romans because they were ruthless. And so Jesus was using that context, their understanding. They knew what he knew how Jews would get along with a Gentile and a tax collector. He was speaking to Jews at the time. All his followers were almost all Jews. And so it was just to help them understand, if there's somebody who does not want to, correct his wrong, then you shouldn't associate with them because they're not somebody who, or, you should give them their time and maybe eventually they'll come to reason. And, but yeah, I think it's in context, it means, to separate from them. Yeah. Distance yourself from them.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Good question. And to close out, we'll go over some of the main points we talked about today. So rinse and repeat, sharpen the saw. And so the first one that we saw was the contrast between a wise person and a foolish person, in that a wise person is gracious and merciful with his words. But somebody who is foolish is judgmental and critical with his words, and this will eventually lead to his destruction. The next point that we saw is a lot of proverbs about diligence, about avoiding laziness, maturity, and so elevated diligence and eating at the right time versus getting drunk and feasting in the morning, and that was shown as a sign of immaturity of a boyish person. And then we also talked about using things that are under the sun, worldly things like food, wine, and money, in moderation, and using them according to their purpose, not for things outside of their purpose, so that they don't become tools for causing damage. And then lastly, resolving conflicts in private. When you do want to help somebody see their faults, you don't expose them in public. You go to them in private, and then from there, if you can, with an unbiased intermediary that can also shed more light on the issue. All right, that is all that we have for today. Do you guys have any last questions or comments? If not, then we will close out. And next week, Spencer will be preparing chapter 11 for us. We'll be leading that Bible study. And if we have time, we'll also go through chapter 12. So 2 short chapters to close out Ecclesiastes. And it was an amazing time. Thank you guys for your ears and for your time. You guys are awesome.